It is believed that each person's life is predetermined long before their birth, and this process continues to unfold. However, this isn't due to fate or chance, but rather to a field of consciousness so vast and ancient that it holds the memory of everything the soul has ever experienced, felt, or dreamed. There exists a space, a kind of repository, where every thought, every intention, and every karmic imprint of all beings who have ever lived is preserved. This field is so silent that most people never hear it, and so subtle that most never sense its presence. Yet, it is always there, hidden behind the veil of everyday consciousness. Perhaps everyone has felt its influence in moments of quiet, during meditation, in the strange clarity of déjà vu, or in dreams that seem more real than reality itself. In ancient times, this phenomenon was called Akasha, and mystics understood it intuitively. In the modern world, it is known as the Akashic records. But don't mistake this for mere New Age fantasy. In truth, it is the blueprint underlying reality itself. Once a person recognizes this, their perception of themselves will never be the same. Sometimes, there's an inexplicable feeling that our current life is merely a fragment of a vast narrative, with key pages missing. It's as if a reader has been suddenly placed in the middle of a novel, without the benefit of the backstory. This sensation is not simply a trick of the imagination, it is the voice of intuition. Deep within, an awareness grows that spiritual experience is not confined to the boundaries of a single lifetime. There exists an archive that preserves the memory of past incarnations, one that doesn't vanish with a new birth. This archive has been known by various names in different cultures and traditions for millennia. We are speaking of the Akashic records, not a material book stored in ancient vaults, but a dimension existing outside of time and space, within a non-physical field of consciousness, a kind of spiritual database. Imagine a vibrational archive where not only actions but also thoughts, feelings, intentions, every decision made, every lesson learned, and every life lived are imprinted. And not just yours, but the experience of every soul, of all existence. The Akashic records are not an esoteric quirk, accessible only to the initiated, but rather a realm of consciousness itself. The term Akashic has its roots in the Sanskrit word Akasha, meaning ether or spirit. In ancient Indian cosmology, this concept represents the fifth element, transcending earth, water, fire, and air. Akasha is considered a subtle energetic substance from which all existence originates. For ancient peoples, Akasha was not merely a beautiful metaphor, but an invisible thread connecting all aspects of being, a field through which divine intelligence manifests itself. And the Akashic records are the memory of this field. This concept is not marginal in metaphysics, as similar ideas can be found in various mystical traditions. In Judaism, there is the concept of the Book of Life. Ancient Egyptians believed in the Hall of Records. In Islam, there is Al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, the preserved tablet, where all events are recorded. In modern Western esotericism, prominent thinkers like Helena Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner deeply explored this field of spiritual memory, which lies beyond ordinary senses. They did not create this idea, but rather resurrected it from the depths of ancient knowledge. If you've ever wondered why some people seem to possess innate wisdom, or why unexplained fears, extraordinary abilities, or deep emotional reactions appear to be older than your current life, rest assured, it's not a sign of madness. These are most likely echoes from the Akashic records. You are far more than your current circumstances. You are a soul carrying a multitude of experiences. These layers of experience are not random. They represent specific patterns, part of a larger program your soul agreed to explore. However, as long as these patterns remain unconscious, they continue to reproduce themselves unconsciously from life to life. From this perspective, keeping these records is no longer a mere formality. It transforms into something far greater, a personal guidebook, a detailed map, and a reliable compass pointing the true path to self-discovery. These records become a treasury of answers, not only revealing the past, but also anticipating the future, reflecting the trajectory of personal growth. Within them lie unrealized ideas, awaiting their time, life lessons requiring understanding and integration, and profound truths inaccessible to most. The primary among these truths is that one's life purpose is not invented, but rather remembered from the depths of memory. Some of these revelations are so fundamental that they are difficult to express in words. Yet their significance prevents them from being kept secret. The essence is that access to these records is not forbidden. Rather, it simply remains unnoticed. Most people do not seek it, not due to a lack of ability, but because they are unaware of such a possibility. Society imposes the belief that knowledge is confined to books, power resides in institutions, and answers should be sought in the external world. However, the Akashic records demonstrate the opposite. Higher knowledge is not acquired, but rather recovered from memory. To tap into this wisdom, one doesn't need to be an enlightened guru or possess psychic abilities. It is enough to find inner stillness to hear the echoes already resounding within. The Akashic field is open not to the chosen few, but to those who are sincere in their intentions and ready for discovery. Thus the question is not whether access to the records is possible, but what will happen once that access is gained. What changes will occur in the laser? Consciousness and life of a person who has unlocked this treasure trove of knowledge. Long before the term Akashic records entered common parlance, there were perceptive individuals, mystics, seers and sages, who possessed direct experience with a reality beyond the visible world. They returned from these encounters with messages imprinted by light, not ink. They did not call it a record, for what they encountered transcended the boundaries of language, being the very essence of truth in its purest, most vibrant form. Across various cultures and continents, stories were passed down orally about a place, if it can even be called a place, where the soul's memories are stored, guarded not by walls, but by a unique frequency. Those who reached this level did not read with their eyes, but felt with their entire being. The rishis of ancient India described Akasha as the primordial substance from which all reality arises, the source of all forms and thoughts. In their understanding, nothing vanished without a trace. Instead, it returned to Akasha, much like waves dissolving back into the ocean. Tibetan mystics referred to this field as a stream of consciousness extending beyond individual existence. Druids, Egyptians, Gnostics, and Mayans, each culture had its own name for this phenomenon. Different languages and symbols, yet a shared knowledge of an invisible realm that held the memory of everything. But what became of this ancient knowledge? It didn't simply vanish. It was systematically dismantled, pushed to the sidelines, and labeled as superstition by power structures that trembled at its potential implications. After all, if we acknowledge that the soul possesses memory, then our self is no longer rigidly bound to nationality, religious affiliation, or even biological origin. In such a scenario, if the soul's records are real, then true power must emanate from within, rather than being imposed from outside. This undoubtedly presents a dangerous idea for systems built on control and subjugation. During the era of colonialism, many indigenous cultures that preserved oral traditions of soul memory suffered severe repression. Sacred rituals that opened intuitive channels to the Akashic records were outlawed, ridiculed, or replaced with alien rites. The burning of ancient libraries, the demonization of pagan practices, the rewriting of spiritual history, all were links in a single chain aimed at severing the connection between people and knowledge that extends beyond the five senses. Even today, in an age celebrating rationalism, the very idea of the Akashic records is often dismissed as pseudoscientific fantasy. However, these same critics cannot offer a convincing explanation for why young children remember past lives, why people who have never met before see identical dreams, or why ancient texts from different civilizations describe the same soul memory experiences with astonishing accuracy. The problem is not a lack of evidence, but rather that this evidence does not fit into the prevailing worldview. After all, a society built on consumption and unquestioning obedience cannot function normally if its citizens begin to question who they were before. And what if the history they were told is incomplete and contains gaps? In the modern world, an oversimplified version of existence is imposed upon the individual, where identity is reduced to a set of social characteristics: name, profession, ethnicity, and gender. The path of life is presented as a segment between two documents, birth and death certificates, with everything else declared fiction. However, deep within every person slumbers an ancient, almost forgotten history. It manifests in mysterious dreams, fleeting sensations, and quiet moments of self-discovery when the external world recedes and one can hear the voice of their own intuition. This is not about creating a new religion or proving anything, but about returning to our origins, to lost knowledge. The Akashic records are not a trendy esoteric teaching, but an ancient concept deeply rooted in the centuries. Today, there is a reawakening of interest in this knowledge. More and more people are becoming aware of its existence. Perhaps this is why the reader has turned to this topic, not to gain new information, but to re-establish a connection with an eternal truth known to our ancestors, but lost under the pressure of circumstances. This is the knowledge that the human soul has always tried to convey to consciousness. The realization that history is imprinted not only in books, but also in energy, vibrations, and within the individual themselves, allows one to reclaim the right to their own story, which no one else can write for them. To delve into the depths of the Akashic records requires neither a library card nor the highest permission from some organization. No academic degrees or affiliation with a spiritual hierarchy are needed. These records were never intended for exclusive ownership or zealous guarding. Their purpose is to be felt, imprinted in memory, and lived through experience. This is their fundamental difference from any other source of knowledge, for they respond not to intellectual effort, but to a specific vibrational frequency. Here, sight gives way to attunement. One does not simply read these records, one harmonizes their entire being with their essence. Like a radio receiver, consciousness shifts into a state where static dissipates, giving way to a clear and distinct signal. For millennia, people have engaged in this process, even without a specific name for it. It occurs in moments of deep meditation, in altered states of consciousness, or in dreams that seem to open doors to other lives or long-forgotten memories. It can happen spontaneously in times of sorrow, moments of boundless joy, or periods of absolute silence. However, one constant remains. The access point is presence. It is impossible to force one's way into these records. On the contrary, one must soften, dissolving into an awareness so calm and genuine that one's own energy aligns with the frequency of truth itself. Mystics and sages often refer to these records as a vibrational field because their content is not expressed in conventional language, in sentences and paragraphs. It is knowledge in its pure form. It is resonance. Sometimes people describe seeing the records as a vast library or an ancient temple filled with scrolls and radiance. Others perceive them as a kaleidoscope of colors, sounds, or symbols that defy translation into words, yet convey a comprehensive meaning on an emotional level. This is the key to understanding. The records do not address the logical mind, but speak directly to the soul. In the modern world, spiritual seekers have developed a variety of methods for consciously entering the mystical space of the collective unconscious. Some resort to guided meditations and prayer practices, such as the pathway prayer, popularized by Linda Howe. Others aim to access the mysterious chronicles through automatic writing, allowing the subconscious to decipher information that is not yet available to conscious perception. Breath work, the use of plant medicines, lucid dreaming, and astral projection also serve as gateways for those ready to venture deep into uncharted territories of consciousness. However, it is important to note that there is no universal method suitable for everyone. In this case, technique takes a back seat, yielding to the power of intention. Intention plays the decisive role. If one enters this space seeking proof, control, or merely for entertainment, they will most likely be met with disappointment. But if approached with reverence, sincere curiosity, and a willingness to change, the field will certainly respond, though not always in a pleasant way. The Akashic records do not pander to the human ego. They reveal profound patterns, expose truths, and show cycles that a person has repeated from life to life, as well as wounds carried longer than one remembers their own name. Yet at the same time, they also demonstrate the immense power dormant within, untapped, ancient, waiting for its time to be remembered. They bring clarity to areas of life where years of confusion and disarray have reigned. And they tirelessly repeat the same message: you haven't been told everything. Surprisingly, many people have already come into contact with the universe's informational field without even realizing it. That very intuition that saved you from a rash step, that moment of foresight when a speaker's words seem to come directly from your own lips, an inexplicable pull towards a certain place, person, or life path. All of these are not random coincidences, but echoes of universal memory, timid glimpses of truth piercing through the veil of everyday life. The human soul strives to break. Through the cacophony of a world intentionally designed to scatter attention, accessing the Akashic records is not an escape from reality, but an opportunity to fully unleash one's potential. It is not a way to bypass life's difficulties, but a chance to see the world as it truly is, without illusions or prejudices, down to its very essence. By touching this universal knowledge, a person doesn't merely recall past incarnations, they realize their true purpose. This realization doesn't remain passive knowledge. It transforms life, changes one's reaction to destiny's challenges, alters the perception of others, and redefines one's own history. Once you feel yourself to be a part of infinity, seeing your place in the cosmos, it becomes impossible to believe in your own insignificance, weakness, or helplessness. A person is not born as a tabula rasa, a blank slate randomly cast into the currents of existence. Each individual comes into this world carrying a profound plan, imprinted at the soul level. This plan is shaped by the experiences of past lives, by intentions and their consequences, forming a unique pattern of destiny. The Akashic records, like a universal library, carefully preserve this blueprint. They contain not merely a list of past incarnations, but also the energetic imprint of all that has been experienced. This is what many call karma, others soul memory, but essentially, it is the spiritual architecture of evolution. Karma is often subject to misinterpretation. It is mistakenly perceived as divine retribution, as punishment for transgressions. However, karma is, first and foremost, memory. It is an impulse, an energy striving for resolution, for the attainment of balance and further growth. It can be compared to an unfinished chord, requiring its logical completion. Imagine that in one life, a person committed betrayal. In their current incarnation, they might experience an irresistible urge to protect others, compensating for a past misdeed. Or, if they long suppressed their truth, they now feel a burning desire to speak, even if their voice trembles with emotion. All of these are not random character traits. They are subtle threads, emotional and energetic patterns woven over many lifetimes, creating the unique history of the soul and its continuous evolution. Beyond this, there is the concept of soul contracts, which are not strict dictates of fate, but rather agreements made at a deep level of consciousness, even before birth. These agreements involve encounters with specific people, overcoming certain life challenges, and extracting valuable lessons from experienced situations. Toxic relationships, complex interactions with parents, or the appearance of a wise mentor at a turning point in life. All of these might not be mere coincidences, but part of a carefully planned soul contract, a mutual agreement for reciprocal personal growth. Despite the complexity and pain of such processes, the Akashic records provide an opportunity to view these contracts from a new angle, not with the aim of avoiding suffering, but to comprehend their true purpose. This is precisely why these records are not merely a repository of information, but a kind of mirror reflecting the path of transformation. By gaining access to their soul's blueprint, individuals begin to perceive difficulties and challenges in an entirely different light. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" they start to seek the answer to, "What is this meant to teach me?" At this point, recurring life scenarios begin to manifest. The same lesson appearing in various guises, the same soul pain, the same fear, the same self-destructive behavior. Discovering these patterns opened the possibility for their reinterpretation and change, as awareness is a powerful tool for breaking vicious cycles. And a choice made with full understanding of what is happening becomes the starting point for deep personal transformation. There is something truly profound in contemplating one's gifts through the lens of the Akashic records. Often, when reflecting on past incarnations, we inadvertently focus on the wounds and traumas endured. However, wisdom and experience also transcend the boundaries of time. Talents, character strengths, and even spiritual abilities can be carried from one life to another, like precious relics. Recall that inexplicable pull you feel towards healing, enlightenment, or creative expression. Perhaps it is not something entirely new and unexplored. but merely an echo of mastery your soul has honed over many lifetimes. The Akashic records help us remember not only the sources of our pain, but also where our inner strength resides. Awareness of your soul's predetermined plan shatters the very foundation for comparisons. Once you grasp that every person is on their unique evolutionary path, the need to conform to someone else's standards and timelines simply vanishes. You begin to approach your own developmental process with deep reverence, stop rushing events, shed feelings of guilt, and start believing that your difficulties and challenges are not merely annoying obstacles, but powerful activators of your potential. The Akashic records reveal the soul's curriculum, allowing us to see the bigger picture of our development. And once you gain this vision, even the most serious failures and missteps begin to be perceived as sacred lessons intended for your growth and transformation. However, perhaps the most inspiring truth is that one's life path is not predetermined. While past experiences undoubtedly influence the present, they do not constrain its development. Karma is not an eternal sentence, and agreements made by the soul are subject to revision. Established patterns of behavior and thought can be broken. The essence lies not in fatalistic predetermination, but in conscious choice. The Akashic records are not chains binding an individual to an inevitable fate. Rather, they serve as a compass offering guidance, while the choice of route remains with the individual. Every person holds a pen with which they can, at any moment, either reproduce old, familiar patterns or initiate an entirely new turn of events. Therefore, when asking about your purpose, do not expect a revelation from above. Rather, it is an invitation to remember what is already embedded deep within the soul. The original design is always within you, and the Akashic records merely serve as a key to deciphering and realizing it. For many, the idea of the Akashic records seems at best a poetic concept belonging to the world of mystics and metaphysicians, a comforting metaphor for those who believe in something more. However, what if it's not just a beautiful allegory? What if what ancient sages described as a spiritual library is, in fact, what modern science is only beginning to grasp through the lens of energetic fields, quantum theory, and consciousness research that challenges established notions of reality? In scientific circles, there's a prevailing tendency to disregard the Akashic records, and there's an explanation for this. They don't conform to a materialistic worldview where everything must be measurable and tangible. These records cannot be examined under a microscope or quantitatively assessed in laboratory conditions. However, much like consciousness with its thoughts, dreams, and memories, the Akashic records, though immeasurable, undoubtedly exist. It's important to understand that invisible does not mean unreal. Consider that even the internet signal through which you are reading this text is invisible. Modern physics has long concluded that reality is not as solid as it might appear at first glance. At the quantum level, everything boils down to energy, vibrations, interconnections, and dynamics. What we perceive as form is actually a dense accumulation of frequencies. In this context, an interesting hypothesis emerges. Information, rather than matter or energy, might be the fundamental basis of the universe. It is precisely here that the idea of a field of preserved data gains a scientific foundation and ceases to be merely a mystical concept. Erwin Laszlo, a distinguished system philosopher and two-time Nobel Peace Prize nominee, proposed the concept of the Akashic field as a universal informational field underlying all existence. In his view, the universe is not a random formation, but a coherent system governed by the information stored in this field. Notably, Laszlo arrived at this idea not from ancient texts, but by discovering parallels between advanced physics and spiritual traditions. For him, the Akashic records were not a figment of fantasy, but a scientific necessity awaiting its time for full comprehension. There is also the hypothesis of the holographic universe, actively promoted by scientists such as David Bohm and Karl Pribram. This concept suggests that the cosmos functions like a hologram, where every minute part contains information about the whole. In other words, all information is encoded everywhere and exists eternally. For example, every cell in the human body carries the complete imprint of its genetic code. Similarly, every point in space can potentially store memories of every moment, every life lived, and every possibility. Does this not resemble something familiar? While such theories do not definitively prove the existence of the Akashic records in their traditional sense, they certainly lift a veil of mystery. They refute the established notion of humanity as isolated beings lost in a soulless, mechanical universe. Instead, they point to something far deeper and more interconnected, a cosmos woven from mind, memory, and unbreakable connections, a field that stores all memories, a universe knowing itself through each of us. Even near-death experiences, once dismissed as mere hallucinations, are now becoming a key to understanding. Many individuals who have undergone clinical death and returned to life describe a realm of knowledge where their entire lives unfold before them in full, not for judgment, but for profound comprehension. Some recount not only seeing their own lives, but also the ripple effect of their actions on others, like an echo reverberating through space and time. This level of awareness, this all-encompassing perspective, resonates with descriptions of spiritual practices used to access the Akashic records. It's not a simple recounting of stories, but a transmission of memory that transcends time. The enigma of intuition remains unsolved. How can one explain a mother's premonition of danger looming over her child hundreds of miles away? Where does this infallible knowledge come from? A sense that something is wrong even before it happens. Such phenomena point to the existence of a deep connection that extends beyond rational thought. They suggest that humanity is linked to a vast informational field, immeasurably larger than individual consciousness. This isn't about random hunches, but about the awakening of ancient memory. The Akashic records don't ask us to believe in something new. They invite us to remember what has long been forgotten. Perhaps the universe is not a cold and indifferent mechanism, but a conscious and purposeful creation. Thoughts, decisions, and the very essence of a person are not fleeting moments that disappear in the stream of time, but an integral part of a living chronicle that holds everything. Science cannot yet explain this, but it is gradually approaching understanding. And when the gap between scientific knowledge and spiritual experience is bridged, it will become clear that the greatest truths were never hidden. Humanity simply stopped looking for them where they should. From birth, the world relentlessly shapes one's identity, not by asking questions, but by asserting. It bestows a name, nationality, religion, education system, a set of beliefs, and a long list of rules. It defines the boundaries of reality, imagination, and what is even dangerous to consider. And amidst this multitude of unspoken agreements, one message slips through, sounding louder than the rest. Forget. Forget who you are. Forget the lives you've lived. Forget your origins. Forget your knowledge. What is happening cannot be called a simple coincidence or an unfortunate consequence of living in modern society. It is part of a meticulously constructed system designed to sever humanity's connection to everything that empowers and liberates it, to everything that reminds us of the soul's deep memory, which transcends name, position, or identification. For one who remembers their true essence cannot be controlled, and control is the primary value in the modern world. Instead of fostering independence, individuals are forced into blind obedience. Intuition is replaced by mechanical repetition, and deep inner work by the completion of school assignments. People are taught to seek answers in the external world, ignoring their inner voice. Visionaries are called dreamers. Memories of past lives are dismissed as fantasy, and a profound connection to inexplicable phenomena is encouraged to be forgotten. Instead, society imposes a simplified, materialistic worldview where everything sacred is reduced to superstition or entertainment. For this reason, the astral chronicles, known as the Akashic records, seem unfathomable to most people. The reason lies not in their inaccessibility, but in a mental conditioning trained to reject everything that cannot be verified by methods designed to limit consciousness. Society instills that truth comes from authorities, knowledge requires diligence, and wisdom is valuable only after expert evaluation, commercialization, or institutionalization. However, the spiritual nature and the Akashic records function differently. In reality, everyone has already touched them, simply without realizing it. This refers to moments of sudden insight that seem unprompted. The feeling of having known someone for a long time upon first meeting, an inner voice warning of danger, revelations in dreams, inexplicable déjà vu, and an irresistible pull to certain places, cultures, or eras. These are not random glitches, but fragments of memories that were diligently attempted to be erased. However, memory does not disappear without a trace. It merely lies dormant. Despite the noise of daily routines and imposed beliefs, the soul retains its memories. Culture strives to silence its voice, but it finds ways to manifest. Through art, coincidences, crises that force a reevaluation of life, and through suffering that lays bare emotions. Forgetting has a powerful impact, but memory possesses even greater strength. This is where the most painful truth lies. The world has sought to conceal this knowledge for centuries. For a person who retains memory of the past poses a threat to the existing order. Such individuals are not inclined to blind obedience, nor are they enticed by the fleeting prospect of superficial success. They refuse to play the roles imposed upon them, as they possess the ability to see the truth hidden behind the veil of illusions. And, what's worse, they help others shed the shackles of deception. It is for this reason that mystics were brutally persecuted, shamans were forced into silence, and the keepers of indigenous ancient wisdom were either annihilated or stripped of their identity. The true reason was not religious disagreement, but the desire for suppression and control. However, today, we observe this system cracking. Gaps are forming in its foundation, and more people are awakening from spiritual amnesia, asking questions for which answers cannot be found in textbooks or news reports. They feel a need for something more, something deeper and truer. And once this awakening process has begun, it can no longer be stopped. For upon starting to remember, one realizes the extent of their forgetfulness. And with each recovered fragment of memory, their lost power returns. They were not destined to remain in ignorance, but to awaken. The Akashic records, the repository of universal wisdom, were never hidden. Humanity was simply taught not to look in their direction. But now, people are beginning to see, and this fundamentally changes everything. Memories are not merely a journey into the past, but rather a deepening into the essence of one's own self. The Akashic records are not hidden in distant dimensions, guarded by mysterious figures in exotic attire. They permeate the very core of a person's being, encoded in the silence that reigns between thoughts. To access them, it's not about elaborate ceremonies, but about sincere openness. It's not about a spectacular display, but about the ability to be here and now. No special incantations are required, only honest questions. No spiritual regalia are needed, only the courage to be alone with oneself and to listen, despite the surrounding noise. It is at this stage that many hesitate. They expect thunderous revelations, vivid visions, something sensational. However, the records rarely speak loudly. They whisper instead, and this whisper is remarkably similar to one's own inner voice, but deeper, calmer, and more ancient. Often, it manifests as a fleeting sensation, a sudden insight, a moment of clarity that arises when least expected and vanishes just as quickly if one tries to control it. It is impossible to force access to this knowledge. One can only create favorable conditions for its manifestation. Finding one's authentic self is a process that requires specific conditions: solitude, surrender, and inner freedom. It is necessary to create a space where one can unearth what has been buried under the weight of everyday life. This implies a temporary withdrawal from the continuous flow of external stimuli, a kind of exit from the matrix, allowing one to tune into an inner frequency. It is about consciously choosing silence in a world that persistently calls for ceaseless activity. And it's not about a fleeting trend for quietude, but about the fact that truth is born in silence. It is in moments of solitude that the soul finds its voice, and its messages are often ineffable. One should start by simply being alone with their questions, not striving for immediate answers, but seeking to establish contact with themselves. It is important to ask not what one should do, but what one needs to remember. One should address fears that seem irrational, relationships that feel unfinished, and recurring life patterns. There is no need to rush. It is enough to simply ask the question and be open to the feelings that may arise. Sometimes the answer comes instantly, like a flash of insight. In other cases, it appears later, in a dream, a line of a song, a conversation that seems too apt to be a mere coincidence. This is a message from the subconscious, breaking through the mask of everyday life. Journaling can be a valuable aid on the path of self-discovery. By engaging in stream of consciousness writing, one allows their rational mind to recede, opening space for a deeper inner voice. During this period, dreams may become more vivid and memorable, and synchronistic events begin to multiply, which is not just coincidence, but a sign of tuning into more ancient, timeless frequencies. One of the most effective ways to awaken memories is through working with the shadow self. Often, the obstacle to accessing deep records is not a lack of ability, but avoidance. One may fear what might be revealed in the process of remembering: painful decisions, old feelings of guilt, unfinished karmic cycles. However, the purpose of these records is not to induce shame, but to facilitate integration and healing. They urge one to stop running from the past and begin moving toward a possible future. This is why the process of accessing deep records can be emotionally intense. It is not only a spiritual, but also a cellular process, as the body stores memories of lived experiences. During this period, tears may flow, and waves of sorrow or liberation may rise unexpectedly. It is important to allow these feelings to manifest, as this is not a sign of weakness, but a process of release and reorganization of the inner world. One is not broken, but restructuring, making space for new experiences and understanding. Delving into the depths of the Akashic records is a deeply individual process. For some, meditative practice serves as the gateway to this repository of universal memory. For others, it's breathing exercises, contemplating nature, or immersing oneself in the creative process. Art has always been a kind of portal, for genuine creativity stemming from the heart represents subconscious communication in the language of the Akashic records. Musical compositions, paintings, poetic lines. These are not just hobbies, but vibrations of a specific frequency, capable of awakening memories that surpass even the wisest books in their power. On this journey, no spiritual guides or labels are required. All that is needed is honesty with oneself, insatiable curiosity, a willingness to delve into the depths of feelings, and unconditional trust in the experiences that arise. One should believe that nothing arises by chance, that it is not a figment of imagination, but memories surfacing from the depths of the subconscious, buried so deeply that they seem like fiction. However, imagination is nothing more than memory filtered through intuition. The Akashic records reside precisely there, in the space between what is forgotten and what the soul has never let go of. Each return to a lost part of oneself bridges the gap between past and present, bringing one closer to the purpose for which the soul incarnated in this world. Ultimately, memories transform into the very essence of existence, ceasing to be merely a goal and becoming a way of life. One becomes a living library, a channel of connection, a bridge uniting the material and spiritual worlds. The quest for meaning gives way to its embodiment. Imagine a society where the question, "Who am I?" is replaced by the reflection, "Who have I always been?" Millions of people turn not to external sources for value, identity, and direction, but delve into the rich archives of their own soul journeys. Such an awakening transforms not only individuals, but also the entire trajectory of human development. When people remember, truly remember, they free themselves from the imposed scripts and roles prepared by systems of suppression. It is at this moment that transformation begins. The Akashic records are not only a path to personal healing, but also a powerful tool for collective evolution. This is not just an individual journey, but a domino effect. One person's awakening to their soul's memory becomes a catalyst for change. Their walk changes, their speech changes. They become less reactive and more intuitive. They begin to create, not consume. Their relationships deepen, and their work becomes more meaningful. They no longer need permission to be themselves, and this freedom becomes contagious. For decades, humanity has been fed the deceptive idea of disconnection, as if people are isolated islands in a vast ocean. This false concept, passed down through generations, has become deeply embedded in consciousness, shaping the perception of the world as an arena of competition and alienation. But is this truly